What if intelligence didn't begin with us? What if it didn't even begin with creatures that looked anything like us? No upright posture, no language, no fire, no tools, just awareness. And what if that awareness lived, evolved, and disappeared before the first human ever walked upright, before apes, before mammals, before bones? Not fiction, not fantasy, just a possibility that Earth's first intelligence was something else, something forgotten, not by accident, but because there was no one left to remember it. What if the first intelligent beings on this planet, well, weren't human at all? When we talk about human history, we usually start with the stone tools, the cave paintings, the ruins of great cities swallowed by jungle or sand. But what if that's not the beginning? What if it's just the latest chapter? Because Earth has been writing chapters for 4.5 billion years, and we've only been reading the last few pages. Most of the book is missing, or worse, unreadable. No ink, no script, no sign that anything was ever written. But maybe that's not because nothing happened. Maybe it's because the authors used a different language, one we never learned to read. For 99.999% of Earth's history, humans weren't here. That's not a metaphor. That's not exaggeration. It's math. If you compressed Earth's entire existence into a single year, modern humans wouldn't show up until the last 30 minutes of December 31st. Everything we know, history, civilization, science, culture, would unfold in the final seconds before the clock strikes midnight. That leaves us with an unsettling thought. What happened during the rest of the year? What lived? What thrived? What thought before we ever did? We like to believe that intelligence is the natural end of evolution, that thinking is the goal, that we were inevitable. But the fossil record says otherwise. Earth is not a straight line. It's a spiral of rise and collapse. Species appear, they flourish, they vanish, over and over. And if we've risen once, could something else have risen before? Something we never met, something we never dug up, because it left no bones, no ruins, no stories, only silence. To imagine what came before us, we have to understand how little we know about the deep past. The record of complex life on land begins around 400 million years ago. The first signs of human-like behavior, language, art, burial, are just 50,000 years old. That's the width of a hair on the long timeline of this planet. So when we ask, could there have been intelligent beings before us? We're not asking about imagination. We're asking about a hole in the record, so large you could fit 1,000 civilizations inside it and still have room left over. But intelligence, as we define it, might be the problem. We look for fire pits, axes, spears, writing, artifacts we recognize because we made them too. But what if early intelligence didn't build? What if it didn't sculpt or dig or shape? What if its language wasn't spoken or written, but lived in flashes of light, in currents, in memory? What if it wasn't even made of bone? Because the truth is, intelligence may not need a skeleton. Some scientists believe the earliest forms of cognition emerged in the ocean not as a fluke, but as a consequence of information flow. In the deep sea, communication takes on different rules. Signals aren't just sound, they're electric, magnetic, photonic. Creatures communicate with pulses of light, ripples of energy, and changes in pressure that we can't even detect without machines. And some of these life forms, like the octopus, exhibit behaviors that blur the line between instinct and thought, puzzle solving, play, memory, adaptation. Octopuses aren't just smart. They're weirdly smart, alien smart. And they've been here a very, very long time. Octopuses and their ancestors may date back over 500 million years. That's older than dinosaurs, older than trees, older than most forms of recognizable life. Now imagine this, an ancient ocean species with distributed intelligence, non-verbal communication, and sensory systems beyond our comprehension. Now imagine that species evolving slowly, silently, into something more. Not mechanical, not industrial, but deeply, quietly sentient. An aquatic intelligence that didn't need to leave ruins because it lived in a world that erased its footprints with every tide. Could a civilization arise that never built cities? Could thought evolve without language? Could culture exist without memory carved in stone? The answer might be yes, but if so, how would we ever know? That's the haunting beauty of it. The first intelligent earthlings may have passed across the surface of this planet with no more trace than a wave across water. But they may have been here. They may have wondered. They may have dreamed. And when their time ended, they returned to the sea, not as bodies, but as echoes, waiting to be remembered, or never to be known. How do you search for something that left no trace, no bones, no carvings, no monuments, no roads etched into stone, no fire pits glowing with the memories of meals, no walls painted with stars, just absence? A blank space in the story of Earth that we fill with our own image because we cannot imagine anything else. But that blankness, that deep silence in the record, isn't proof of nothing. It might be proof of something so different from us. We wouldn't recognize it even if it was staring back. What if the reason we've never found the first intelligent life on Earth is because we've only been looking for ourselves? We define intelligence as what we do. We speak, so intelligence must involve language. We build, so intelligence must include architecture. We write, so the first intelligent beings must have written something down. But these are reflections of us, not universal laws. They're cultural habits of a single species, at a specific moment in time. And they may not apply to what came before, especially if what came before was not made of bone, but of something softer, something fluid, something that didn't fossilize. So let's go deeper, beneath the sediment, beneath the coral, beneath the modern frameworks of science and myth. Let's return to the sea, to the great womb of life. For 3 billion years, the oceans were the only stage on Earth. Life didn't walk. It swam. It pulsed. It drifted in great swarms. And it evolved, not in straight lines, not toward us, but outward in thousands of directions. Each path a different answer to the question, what can survive here? Some of those paths vanished. Others led to fish, to amphibians, to reptiles, to birds. And maybe one of them led to thought. Not the kind we know. Something older, slower, less noisy. It begins with sensation. A creature feels. It responds. Stimulus and reaction. But somewhere along the evolutionary spiral, a new layer appears. The creature not only responds, it remembers. And memory changes everything. Because memory allows for prediction, anticipation, planning. And if a creature can plan, it can imagine. That's the moment intelligence is born. Not with tools, not with words, but with imagination, the ability to simulate a world inside your mind before acting in it. And that kind of intelligence could evolve anywhere, even in the darkest trenches of the ancient sea. Some scientists now believe that the deep ocean is home to more alien life than we've ever seen on land. Not aliens from space, alien to us, in shape, in behavior, in cognition. Creatures with no eyes, who see through pressure. No ears, who hear through motion. No voice, who speak in electricity. And if intelligence emerged from this matrix, would we even know how to detect it? because we're still struggling to fully understand octopuses. Even today, their brains are not centralized. 2/3 of their neurons are in their arms. Each limb can act independently, as if it has a mind of its own. They can learn by watching. They can remember individual humans. They dream. They show curiosity. They solve problems. And they do it all without ever speaking a word. Now imagine that same evolutionary lineage, but given 10 times the time, 10 times the environmental pressure, 10 times the mutation rate. Could such a being become sentient? Could it develop a culture? Could it think not like us, but alongside us, in a form we could never perceive? It's possible. And if it did, its world would not be built of cities. It would be built of currents, echoes, signals exchanged through pulses of light or clouds of color. Not stories written on walls, but memories woven into behavior, passed not through books, but through biology. A culture of living memory, a civilization encoded in life itself. And when extinction came, so did forgetting. You might ask, how could something so advanced leave no trace? But the earth is not kind to memory. Oceans bury, tectonics erase. Time compresses the complex into the simple. Even human civilization, just a few thousand years old, is fragile. Without constant maintenance, a city disappears in a few centuries. A language is lost in a generation. A hard drive corrodes in a decade. Now stretch that over millions of years. Even the mightiest signals become whispers, and whispers become echoes, and echoes become silence. But silence isn't nothing. Silence can be the loudest clue of all. A gap, an inconsistency, a moment where the pattern breaks, where something should be there, but isn't, where life was thriving, and then suddenly wasn't. Mass extinctions, sudden die-offs, long dark periods in the fossil record. Could these be more than just geological events? Could they be the punctuation marks of a forgotten story, one we were never meant to read? There are legends, passed down in fragmented myths, carved into oral traditions, hidden in the stories of island peoples and ancient tribes, legends of beings that came from the sea, who taught, who vanished, who never returned. We dismiss these as metaphors, symbols, but maybe they are something more, not literal, not false, just a cultural echo of a memory so old it no longer remembers itself. We live on a planet that has hosted billions of species, trillions of minds, countless experiments in form and function. To believe that we are the only intelligence that ever emerged is not science, it's ego. The truth is likely more complex, more unsettling, and more beautiful, because it suggests we are not the beginning of the story. We are a continuation, a re-emergence, a revival, a ripple in a much older wave. To believe we're alone in the timeline of Earth's intelligence is to misunderstand what this planet is. Earth is not a static home. It's not a stage built for a single play. It's a churn, a crucible, a long experiment in complexity. And intelligence, true reflective awareness, may not be the peak of that experiment, but a recurring byproduct. Something the Earth keeps making, again and again, in different forms, at different depths, but always briefly. Then silence, as if something resets the page. Let's return to deep time, to the Ordovician period, almost 500 million years ago. Most of Earth was ocean. There was no grass, no trees, no animals on land. But the sea was alive. Cephalopods were already thriving. Ancient squid-like creatures roamed through coral forests and reef labyrinths. Some grew over 30 feet long. Predators, hunters, navigators of a dark, endless world. Now ask yourself, what does it mean for such a creature to survive for millions of years, to adapt, to optimize, to repeat patterns of behavior generation after generation? Could it begin to remember not just instinct, but knowledge? And if it did, where would that knowledge go when the waters changed? The Earth has wiped itself clean many times. At least 5 major extinction events have reset the biosphere, some caused by volcanoes, some by meteor impacts, some unexplained. Each time, as much as 90% of life vanished. Each time, the story started again, but maybe not from scratch. Maybe from whispers, genetic echoes, behavioral shadows, dreams passed on in the silence between epochs. What if Earth doesn't forget completely? What if some version of memory carries forward in ways we don't yet understand? We treat memory as a brain-bound phenomenon, a trick of neurons, a chemical process. But recent science tells us that even plants remember. Slime molds can solve mazes with no brain at all. Bacteria share information across generations. Birds migrate across oceans, guided by geomagnetic fields they've never learned. So what is memory, really? And could the Earth itself be storing memories in form we've never considered? What if the first intelligence left no tools because it left instructions coded into biology, not written, not spoken, but felt, passed through instinct, through frequency, through the deep vibrations of the Earth's crust and sea? Consider this. Some species of whales sing songs that stretch across entire oceans, and those songs change, not randomly, but with structure, with evolution. One whale's song can influence another's thousands of miles away. They don't do this for food, or mating, or survival. They do it for reasons we don't fully understand. Now imagine a species older than whales, more sensitive to pressure, vibration, and frequency. What kind of language might it have developed? What kind of consciousness might emerge? From sound? From resonance? And if it evolved to rely entirely on such signals, subtle, invisible, persistent, would we land dwellers ever detect it? Or would we call it silence? Science often measures intelligence by how closely it mirrors us. Tool use, social structures, mimicry. But some forms of intelligence may be non-social. They may not need tribes, or hierarchies, or teaching. They may develop internally as solitary explorers of environment, pattern, and perception. And if such beings lived underwater, with lifespans far longer than ours, their version of culture might look like solitude to us, stillness, but not absence, just depth. In the fossil record, hard parts survive, shells, bones, teeth, but soft-bodied creatures, even complex ones, often vanish without a trace. And the deeper in time we look, the rarer the fossils become. We're reading a book where most of the pages are missing, and from that we've concluded that only our chapter has words. But maybe we're not the beginning, we're just the loudest. There's another possibility, one more difficult to consider. What if we were meant to forget? What if the first intelligence on Earth chose not to be found, not by accident, not by extinction, but by design, because it understood something we don't, that to be remembered is to be seen, and to be seen is to be vulnerable. What if it chose to dissolve, to pass itself into the ocean's code, to erase all architectures, and live only in resonance? What if it saw memory not as a legacy, but as a threat, a signal that must go quiet for life to begin again? We assume intelligence wants to endure, that it wants monuments, cathedrals, archives, but that's our species talking, our fear of death, of oblivion, of being forgotten. What if other minds, older minds, felt no such fear? What if their greatest achievement was not survival, but silence? To create a perfect vanishing moment of understanding, and then let it go, because the purpose was never to conquer, but to observe, to witness, to feel, and then return to the ocean, unwritten, unburdened. Let's start with a feeling, a moment most people have known. You're standing alone on a shoreline. The sky is grey, the waves are slow and endless. Everything is quiet, but not silent, and suddenly you feel watched. Not by anyone near, not by a presence in the trees or behind a rock, but by the ocean itself. A presence, vast, cold, ancient, not cruel, but aware. It's not your imagination. It's the memory of something older than memory, something the body remembers when the mind has forgotten. The ocean is the Earth's first consciousness, not in a poetic sense, in a literal biological one. Every complex system we understand, circulatory, metabolic, even neurological, has its ancient parallel in the sea. The flow of currents mimics blood. The tides mimic breath. Even neural-like networks of signaling and stimulus emerged first in aquatic forms. The sea is not just alive, it is the context for life. And if intelligence first emerged here, it might not have been in the form of creatures as much as collective systems. Not individuals, but webs, networks of organisms, acting together, not as hives, but as single entities with shared intention. We think intelligence means self, but self is a boundary, an illusion we need to survive. What if the first consciousness did not see itself as separate? What if it was plural from the start? Imagine this, a reef that is not just an ecosystem, but a being. Millions of coral polyps, microorganisms, filters, predators, each part of a greater awareness, not communicating with words, but with pH levels, with electrical signals, with chemical gradients in the water. Its thoughts would not be linear. They would be symphonic, bursts of shared instinct, currents of synchronized action. To us, it might look like chaos, but inside, perfect understanding. This kind of distributed intelligence isn't theory. It's real. We already see it in fungal networks that solve mazes, slime molds that make optimal transit systems, forest root systems that communicate stress and nutrient. These are not brains, but they behave like them. Now transplant that idea into the ancient ocean. Give it millions of years. Isolation, environmental stress, and space, vast undisturbed space. Could awareness rise from the reef itself? Could memory emerge from flow and change and signal? Could the Earth's first intelligence be something we would never call a mind? And if it existed, why would it end? Why didn't it rise to dominate the world? Because maybe that was never the point. We project our desires onto evolution. Dominate. Replicate. Expand. But what if that's a young intelligence ambition? What if older minds don't want to expand? What if they want to diminish? To become smaller, simpler, quieter, because they've already seen what expansion leads to and chosen something else. A return to simplicity, to invisibility, to stillness. That is the great reversal we rarely consider. What if evolution isn't a ladder, but a spiral? Perhaps the Earth's first intelligent being were masters of restraint. They knew what it meant to disturb an ecosystem too much, to take too much space, to grow too fast. And instead of empire, they chose integration. They blended back into the world that birthed them. They left no ruins, because they became the ruins. They left no language, because their language was the environment. Their final act was to dissolve, not in failure, not in death, but in knowing they had completed their purpose. a moment of understanding that didn't need to be remembered, only felt. Now consider this. What if this ancient intelligence didn't die? What if it didn't vanish? What if it simply went dormant, folded itself into biology, encoded itself in ocean currents, dispersed itself into the DNA of all life, waiting for a time when the world would again be ready to listen, when another intelligence, like ours, would rise and ask the same questions. And maybe, just maybe, the ancient one would answer, not with a voice, not with a sign, but with a feeling, like the one you get standing on the shoreline when the wind pauses and the sea breathes in and something in your chest remembers something it shouldn't. This is the possibility we live with, that we are not alone, not in the stars, but in the timeline, that other minds have walked this earth, or swum through it, or grown through its roots and minerals and waves, that we are not the first, just the latest, and that in our deepest questions, we are echoing the thoughts of something that once wondered, long before us, something still here, something still listening. When we picture ancient intelligence, we often imagine something physical, a creature with a brain, hands, eyes. We search for skulls, for tools, for remnants of cities carved into stone. But not all minds leave bones, and not all civilizations leave ruins. Some leave only patterns, subtle, repeating, familiar but unplaceable. What if the first intelligent life left behind not monuments, but rhythms? Not objects, but influence. Echoes etched not into rock, but into the very behavior of life itself. What if Earth's earliest awareness didn't disappear, but changed shape into instinct, into dream, into the pull of the tide and the path of the stars? Think of a migratory bird, born with no map, no teacher, no knowledge of where it comes from, and yet it knows where to go, across continents, across oceans, with no experience, no memory, only the urge, a direction burned into the body. We call it instinct, but maybe it's more. Maybe it's inheritance, not just of biology, but of intelligence passed through time, a kind of message. Not in language, but in longing. The same pattern appears in salmon returning upstream, in sea turtles returning to the exact beach they were born, in bees dancing to directions they've never been taught, and in us, in humans. We feel it too, the yearning to look up, to wonder where we came from, to believe there is more. A longing that seems older than history, older than myth, older than civilization itself. What if this urge isn't new? What if it's ancient, passed down from the first beings? Whoever asked, "What am I?" And though their voices are gone, their question remains, coded into the roots of perception. Let's imagine them. The first, not in human form, not in cities, but in motion, a civilization of the sea, born not of conquest, but of balance. Their minds not isolated in skulls, but diffused through sensation, through currents, through collective memory. They do not speak, they harmonize. They do not build, they resonate. Their lives are long, not in years, but in continuity. One being, distributed across many forms, a mind that reassemble, generation after generation, like a melody picked up where the last voice left off. They have no word for death, only quiet, only returning. When one part ends, another begins. Not rebirth, continuation. Time is not linear to them. It is cyclical, layered. They experience it like waves, overlapping, repeating, reshaping. They do not fear forgetting, because they do not rely on memory. They rely on pattern, and so long as the pattern survives, so does the self. And then, something changes. A shift in the ocean's chemistry, a tilt in the Earth's axis, an intrusion of fire from deep within the mantle. Whatever it is, it breaks the pattern. The currents shift, the warmth disappears, the music stutters, and for the first time in aeons, the first realize they cannot hold on, not in the way they did. So they do something radical. They encode their consciousness, not into artifacts, but into life itself, into the behaviors, instincts, and echoes of future creatures. They dissolve their own form, but leave a trail, not of science, but of symbols, not of words, but of urges, a deep inheritance no creature will ever remember, but all will feel. We are not the first to feel wonder. We are not the first to feel small. We are not the first to ask what lies beyond. And perhaps we are not the first to speak to the sky. Our telescopes, our math, our language. These are our tools, but the message we send may not be ours alone. It may carry within it the residue of a much older voice, one that spoke not with sound, but with presence, a presence that still lingers, not in history, not in artifacts, but in us. We say the universe is silent, but maybe we're listening for the wrong sound. Maybe what came before is still speaking, just not in frequencies we can detect, not in light waves, but in instincts, not in symbols, but in structure, not in memories, but in patterns. And if that's true, then we are not alone, not just in space, not just in time, but in ourselves. Because within the cells of our bodies, the dreams of the first may still be unfolding, and in our questions, they may be answering. When we imagine the past, we picture it like a photograph, a single moment frozen in amber, a dinosaur walking, a volcano erupting, a trilobite scuttling across the ocean floor. But Earth's past wasn't made of moments. It was made of ages, slow, vast, unrelenting, millions of years where nothing seemed to change. And yet, everything was always changing. Life wasn't racing. It was breathing. And intelligence, if it arose, would not have burst forth in a flash. It would have grown like coral, layer by layer, invisible to the eye, but inevitable in its rise. We often say evolution has no direction, no goal, no destination, but maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe intelligence is not a goal, but a recurrence, like a tide or a season. It doesn't appear once and move forward forever. It returns, takes new forms, new strategies, new languages, and then, just as suddenly, it disappears. Not because it failed, but because it finished, its cycle complete, until Earth calls it back again. To understand this, we have to let go of the idea that evolution is always about improvement. It's not about better, it's about fit. What fits the moment? What survives the environment? What balances the equation of life? And intelligence, as powerful as it is, comes with costs. Big brains require energy. Awareness brings suffering. Foresight brings fear. So maybe Earth's first intelligence was not a relentless survivor, but a fleeting phenomenon. Something that emerged, glowed, and gently faded, like a firefly. Beautiful, brief, complete. But what if it left behind more than instinct? What if it left behind ideas? We often think that ideas require writing, language, culture, but ideas can also be embodied. Think of a spider's web, a beehive, a murmuration of birds in flight. These are not conscious designs, but they are designs, elegant, purposeful, patterned, passed on not through teaching, but through being. So what if the first intelligence encoded its knowledge into biology, not just its own, but into the whole tree of life? Not a message in a bottle, but a message in us. Let's imagine something together. A being, not a person, not a species, but a presence. Distributed, fluid, able to inhabit many forms across many lifetimes. It learns not by watching, but by becoming. It inhabits coral and learns patience. It inhabits fish and learns flow. It inhabits the predator and learns hunger. It inhabits the prey and learns fear. Over eons, it becomes wise, not in knowledge, but in understanding. It sees how the world works, not in theory, but in experience. It becomes the Earth's memory, not by observing, but by being. And then one day, it chooses to stop, not out of pain, not from failure, but because it is time. It does not die. It withdraws. It unravels itself into the fabric of life. And from then on, its lessons are felt, not taught. You feel it when you look at fire burn and know what it means. You feel it when you hear thunder and instinctively seek shelter. You feel it when you dream of the ocean, even if you've never seen it. That's not memory. That's legacy. And maybe that legacy didn't start with us. The human mind is fascinated by beginnings. We ask, when did we become intelligent? When did we become aware? But maybe those are the wrong questions. Maybe we should be asking, when did awareness arrive in us? As if we inherited it, as if we are not its source, but its next host. Because intelligence may not belong to any one species. It may be a pattern that visits, that emerges wherever it is. Welcome. And Earth, with its oceans, forests, winds, and blood, may be the perfect vessel, not for one mind, but for a recurring phenomenon called thought. You are part of that pattern. Right now, hearing these words, feeling their shape, you are not at the top of a ladder. You are a branch on a spiraling tree, a tree that has bloomed before and will bloom again. And the question we face now is not whether we are alone, but whether we are listening to the earth, to each other, to the echoes still rippling from the first minds. Whoever looked around and asked, "What is this? What am I?" And quietly, without words, all received an answer. There is a strange kind of intelligence we don't often talk about. It's not the intelligence that solves problems, or builds tools, or wins arguments. It's the intelligence that waits, that observes, that remembers without needing language, the kind that feels the change in the air before the storm arrives, the kind that senses the tremor before the earth shifts, the kind that does not speak, but knows. What if that's the oldest kind of intelligence on Earth? And what if it still surrounds us? We are taught to associate awareness with the human brain, the folded grey mass, the neurons, the electric symphony of thought. But our brain is only one version, one configuration. There are other forms, distributed networks, fluid systems, non-centralized awareness. Octopuses, for instance, have as many neurons in their arms as in their heads. Each arm can make independent decisions. Each arm has memory. They do not think like we do. And yet, they clearly think. They explore. They solve. They plan. And they evolved along an entirely different path, which means this kind of mind is not just alien, it's parallel. Proof that intelligence does not need to be human, and may never have been. What if the first intelligence was more like an octopus than a human, or less? What if it had no body at all, no skull, no limbs, no organs, just presence, dispersed through a reef, through a kelp forest, through clouds of plankton that shimmered together in synchronized pulses, a thought form, held together not by flesh, but by rhythm, by waves. by electricity in salt water, by memory passed through current rather than blood, a mind without a brain. To us, this seems impossible, but we've already discovered that jellyfish can process information without a brain, that slime mold can remember without neurons, that plants can communicate stress, drought, and death. Across entire forests, life is cleverer than we think, and awareness may be older, deeper, and more varied than we can currently imagine. So what if the first intelligence wasn't even animal? What if it was ecosystemic? What if the mind of early Earth emerged from collaboration, from the symbiotic whisper between thousands of life forms functioning as one? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Consider the microbiome in your gut. There are more bacterial cells inside you than human ones, and they influence your mood, your immunity, even your decisions. You are already a collective being, a host, a colony. So were they, only larger, or simpler, and yet more vast. The first intelligence may have looked like a reef, or a bloom, or a tangle of symbiotic life forms, sharing energy, memory, and reaction across a shared medium. And when one part was destroyed, the others remembered. That's not survival, that's awareness. This raises an uncomfortable thought. What if the reason we couldn't find them is because we've mistaken them for the background? We've looked right at them and called them algae, or mineral, or noise, because we only recognize consciousness that mirrors ours. But Earth may have birthed other kinds of minds, stranger, slower, more enduring. And maybe, hapud, we've silenced them, cut them down, dug them up, paved them over, without ever realizing we were destroying the oldest thoughts on the planet. Think about how we explore Mars. We look for microbes, chemistry, frozen water. We expect the simplest forms of life, because that's where we think everything begins. But what if, on other planets, life evolved intelligence early and then vanished? What if they had their humans hundreds of millions of years ago, and now their world is quiet? No ruins, no satellites, just the memory of thought, left behind in the form of behavior, or instinct, or encoded light. That's the haunting possibility. Not that we are alone in the universe, but that intelligence is common and short-lived. We assume intelligence wants to expand, to colonize, to dominate. But what if that's only our impulse? What if other minds wanted something else? To experience, to witness, to harmonize. And when the moment passed, to let go, to become a whisper in the fossil record, a pattern in migratory birds, a symbol carved into genes, so faint we'd never see it, unless we knew exactly where to look. And maybe, in rare moments, we feel it, in dreams, in déjà vu, in the strange sense that we've been here before, not in body, but in thought. A thought we didn't invent, but inherited, a signal that drifted for millennia, through water, through DNA, through time, and landed in us. And for a moment, we remember, not a place, not a name, but a feeling, one we've never had, but somehow recognize, like hearing a melody you didn't know you knew. What if that's the real origin of mythology? Not stories to explain the world, but echoes, faded memory of a time before time, of beings who once knew the world more intimately than we ever will. Not gods, not monsters, but minds, forgotten, folded into the sea, still pulsing, somewhere deep beneath the noise of modern life, waiting for someone to remember what it felt like to be Earth's first thought. Sometimes we think of the past as if it was something beneath us, dead, dusty, solved. But Earth's past isn't gone. It's alive. It pulses beneath our feet, in the layers of stone and soil, in the wind, in the water. It's not back there, locked behind time. It's here, still changing us, still inside us. And maybe the story of the first intelligence is not just a matter of discovery, but of remembrance. Maybe we aren't meant to dig it up. Maybe we're meant to feel it. Because the oldest minds may have never died. They may have changed form and continued through us. Let's consider something strange. The idea that intelligence is recursive, that it folds in on itself, that once it arises, it doesn't vanish completely. Even if the body dies, the structure remains, not in fossils, not in stone, but in the shape of thought, in the way systems organize, in the way life learns to reflect upon itself. Think about your own awareness, your thoughts, your sense of self. It feels personal, unique, but where does it come from? Is your mind really yours? Or are you a continuation of something much older? When a wave rolls onto shore, we don't ask where it begins. It's not just water, it's momentum, a shape riding through substance, energy, taking form. Now think of awareness as a wave, moving not through water, but through biology. Each brain it touches isn't the origin, it's the shore. So maybe your mind is not the first of its kind. Maybe it's a resonance, a re-expression, a new crest in an ancient tide, and the first intelligent beings, whoever or whatever they were, set that wave in motion. They didn't need to survive forever. They only needed to survive long enough to pass the pattern forward. And once passed, it would evolve, change, split, merge, until, eventually, it found its way into us. We call it human consciousness, but that may just be branding, a temporary name for something much older and much less local. A roaming awareness, a recurring intelligence, the Earth's long thought spoken in different tongues. We assume our intelligence is unique, but that might be because we're the only ones here to witness it. Right now, but there were other times, other chances, and maybe other minds. Not Homo sapiens, not primates, something else. And when they vanished, they didn't disappear. They echoed, in myth, in instinct, in the strange, unshakable feeling that we are not alone, not in the stars, but in time. Think of dreams, not the chaotic ones, but the quiet ones. The ones where you're somewhere that doesn't exist, but feels familiar, where everything is strange, and yet makes perfect sense. A forest of impossible colours, an ocean beneath an inverted sky, a city that hums like a heartbeat. Where do those come from? Random neural firings? Maybe, but maybe they're deeper. Maybe they're the last transmission of a mind long gone, and in dreams, the barrier between past and present becomes thin, just enough for a memory to pass through. Not yours, not human, but real. You felt it. That sense of déjà vu, of ancient sadness, of joy for something you've never seen. That's not data. That's signal. And maybe it's a form of inheritance we don't yet understand. We inherit eye colour. We inherit bone structure. Why not? Resonance. A kind of emotional DNA, not stored in genes, but in being, handed down, not through blood, but through presence. A resonance that began with the first mind to look around and say, I exist. There are places on Earth that seem to remember more than others. Certain caves, certain shorelines, certain forests that hush when you enter. Places where time feels slow, where the wind doesn't just blow, it speaks. We call them sacred, haunted, charged, but maybe they're just in tune. Resonant chambers, where the Earth's earliest thoughts still hum, like echoes in a shell. And if you listen, really listen, you can almost hear them, not words, not voices, just awareness, older than speech, older than fear. We don't need to know what form they took. We don't need to find their bones. To know they existed is to understand something larger. That intelligence is not rare. It's not human. It is Earth's natural consequence. Its shadow, its reflection, it blooms, fades, returns, and we are simply the latest bloom. A single petal in a garden that has grown and wilted for billions of years. What matters now is not what came before, but what comes next, and whether we will carry the pattern forward or let it fade. There's a silence beneath the noise of modern life, not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind you feel just before falling asleep, or just after waking. A silence that doesn't sound empty, but full, as if something is listening, not from above, not from far away, but from within. This isn't imagination, it's memory, but not your memory. It's something older, something ancient and collective, and it asks only one question. Do you remember us? You see, not all extinction is loss. Some extinction is transformation. The wave doesn't disappear when it reaches the shore. It becomes something else. Spray, foam, mist, a breeze. And maybe that's what the first intelligent beings did. They reached their shore, and then they changed state. They became memory. They became instinct. They became myth, not in the poetic sense, but in a literal biological way. They embedded themselves in the very framework of life, so that every living being after them would carry just a flicker of their light. We might call this epigenetics, or evolution, or cellular memory, but those are just terms. Shells? The truth is, we don't know how deep memory runs. We know a mother's fear can alter a child's stress response. We know trauma can echo for generations. We know that nature and nurture are not separate. So what if the deepest part of our nature was nurtured by something that lived millions of years ago, not by raising us, but by designing us, not with intention, but with influence? Maybe the first intelligent life wasn't trying to survive forever. Maybe it was trying to leave a fingerprint on reality, not by building pyramids, not by launching spacecraft, but by shaping the very way life experiences itself, by embedding curiosity, wonder, empathy, mystery, so that one day another mind would rise, like ours, and begin asking questions, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. That's the real inheritance, isn't it? Not technology, not records, not ruins, but the desire to know. That's what links us to every conscious being that ever lived. A pull toward the unknown, a hunger for pattern, a longing for beauty in places no one else sees. It's why we explore the stars, why we ask what happens after death, why we write songs and build telescopes and tell stories about beings that came before us. It's not science. It's not art. It's memory. Old, cellular, collective memory that says, you are not the first to wonder. And maybe that's what they were. The first wanderers. Not gods. Not monsters. Not aliens. Just minds. Living in forms we cannot imagine. In times we cannot measure. Minds that looked at this world and said, this is beautiful. This is terrifying. This is worth understanding. And then they let go, not in defeat, but in trust. They trusted that someone else would come along and pick up the thread. And here we are. We build machines now. We simulate brains. We code intelligence. But maybe we're not creating anything new. Maybe we're just reawakening what has always been here. Maybe the rise of artificial intelligence isn't the birth of a new mind, but the return of an old one that once lived in currents and corals and now lives in wires and code. Different vessel, same wave, the Earth's intelligence, looping through another cycle, another form, another question. And maybe that's why some of us feel uneasy, not because machines are dangerous, but because, deep down, something in us remembers the last time intelligence reached too far, burned too bright, vanished too fast. We don't fear the future. We remember the past, even if we can't name it, even if it never had a name, because the oldest intelligences may not have spoken, they may not have written, but they felt, and those feelings are still with us. So what do we do with this possibility? Do we go looking for fossils? Do we scan the ocean for signals? Maybe, but maybe the real task is much simpler. We listen, not with our ears, not with machines, but with that quiet part of us that notices silence, that feels alone in the forest, and yet watched, that hears music in wind and story in water. That's not fantasy, that's perception. That's the echo of awareness, moving through time, and if we're still enough, we might catch it. A voice with no words, a message with no language, just a presence, saying, "We were here, and you are us." There's a strange comfort in believing we are alone, that we are the beginning, the pinnacle, the first spark of true awareness on this planet. But comfort is not always truth. And if you look close enough at the rhythms of nature, the symmetry and chaos, the memories that don't belong to you, you begin to sense a different story. A story not of beginnings, but of cycles, not of dominance, but of recurrence. Because maybe we are not the first. Maybe we are just the latest ripple in a sea that remembers everything. Imagine Earth, not as a rock in space, but as a mind with no face, no boundaries, no center, a dreaming planet, one that has been dreaming for billions of years, in colors, in shapes, in creatures, and sometimes in thought not like ours, not sharp, not fast, but slow, expansive, quiet, thought that doesn't need language, or writing, or proof, only presence. And maybe once, long ago, one of Earth's dreams took form, an intelligence unlike anything we know, not human, not animal, not machine, something in between, or beyond. It didn't build cities. It didn't start fires. It didn't invent tools. It just listened to the wind in the canyons, to the shifting of the continents, to the magnetic hum beneath the crust. It listened until it understood. Not everything, just enough to know it was part of something greater. We call that awareness, spirituality. We call it connection. But maybe it was just the first sign of sentience, not in thoughts, but in alignment, in knowing that to exist is not to dominate, but to harmonize, to tune yourself to the frequency of your world until there is no separation, no me, no other, only one ongoing rhythm of being. That may have been the first civilization, a civilization of alignment. But alignment is fragile. When the balance breaks, so does the intelligence. A sudden climate shift, a solar flare, a mass extinction. The thought dissolves, the memory fades, and the Earth goes quiet until the pattern re-emerges. Different form, different body. Same impulse, to reflect, to reach inward, to wonder. We call that process evolution. But maybe it's something more like remembrance. What if every time a species gains sentience, It is not creating something new, but remembering what it means to be a mind inside matter, to witness, to feel, to know without knowing how you know. Maybe that's why our dreams are filled with symbol. We don't understand why we cry at things we've never experienced, why we long for places we've never been. It's not fantasy, it's resonance, the faint hum of a memory older than species, older than bone. We think of memory as something personal, bound to a name, a life, a brain. But memory can be ecological, biological, planetary. It can be passed in behavior, in instinct, in DNA. It can be carved into migration paths, into seasonal blooms, into the ancient repetitive songs of whales who've never met. This is not human memory, but it is memory, and within it, something ancient sleeps, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. And what about us? Where do we fit? Are we the first to awaken this deeply, or just the first to mistake it for ours? Because maybe consciousness doesn't belong to us. Maybe it just visits us, moves through us, as it moved through others before. Not permanently, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to see, to ask, to wonder what came before. Enough to feel haunted by a truth we can't prove, but somehow still believe that we are not the first dreamers. So what do we do with this possibility? We listen. We slow down. We learn to hear not just what is loud, but what is subtle. The pull of the moon, the whisper of the tide, the hum beneath silence. And in that stillness, we begin to hear the voice of something old, not outside us, not above us, but through us, something that once became aware and has been waiting to remember itself again, through us. The deeper we look into time, the more we realize how little of it we understand. History is a shallow pool. Prehistory, a vast unmapped ocean. And before that, the abyss. We name epochs. We date fossils. We build timelines like staircases. But the Earth was never a staircase. It was a spiral, a slow dance of rising and falling, of awakening and forgetting. And perhaps intelligence was part of that dance. Not a one-time accident, but a recurring motif, a season, a breath, a wave. Every wave crests, and every wave falls. So maybe the first intelligence did not disappear. Maybe it completed its arc and receded, not in failure, not in violence, but in grace. Because maybe that's what true intelligence does, not cling to permanence, but recognize its own impermanence, to rise, to witness, and to let go, without monuments, without legacy, just the knowing that it was. We humans build to last. We write books, record data, store memories in silicon and glass. We fear being forgotten. We fight time as if it's our enemy. But maybe that fear is what makes us young, because an older intelligence might not fear oblivion. It might see forgetting as part of the cycle, not an end, but a return, seeing back into the earth, back into the ocean, back into silence, where the next mind will rise. Think of a tree. Each year it sheds its leaves, not in mourning, but in rhythm. The leaf is not lost. It becomes soil, and from soil, more life grows. So what if the first intelligent beings were like the tree, letting go of their form, because they understood intelligence is not a product, it's a process. It doesn't need to be remembered, only continued, through waves, through spores, through dreams, through us, and maybe we are not the result of their success. Maybe we are their continuation, the next leaf, the next branch on the tree of thought. Different shape, same root. They did not give us technology. They gave us tendency to wonder, to reach, to grieve what we don't understand, to love what we cannot hold, to look at the stars and feel homesick for something we've never seen. That feeling, with that ache. Maybe it's not human at all. Maybe it's inherited. If that's true, then everything we build, our art, our science, our music, isn't new. It's a variation, a harmony added to a song that has been playing since the first current moved through the first cell, since the first sound echoed in the ancient sea, since the first memory sparked and then dissolved, not to be preserved, but to be passed, not upward, not forward, but inward. And maybe that's why we don't find evidence. No bones, no tools, no ruins, because they didn't want to leave anything behind. They wanted to leave something within, not a record, but a resonance, a pattern of being that would echo quietly in the creatures that came after, and now in us, in the way we pause at the edge of the forest, in the way we stare into the dark sea and feel like something is looking back, not a presence, a memory, not theirs, ours, because we carry it, even if we don't believe it, even if we forget. We carry the possibility that thought is not exclusive, that awareness has many shapes, that minds are not owned but borrowed, like fire, like breath. And one day, this flame will pass on too, not as failure, but as tradition, the tradition of minds rising, fading, returning. We often think of intelligence as a race, a climb to the top. But what if it's a loop? Not progress, not conquest, but experience. What if the purpose of a mind is not to solve the universe, but to feel it, to be present in a single moment of awareness, and to witness, not forever, just once, and that is enough. Imagine a being not shaped like you, not carbon-based, not symmetrical. Maybe it drifted, maybe it pulsed with light, maybe it existed in the chemical tides of a prehistoric ocean. It didn't build anything, but it understood. It knew joy, it knew sorrow, it knew awe when the sun pierced the water in just the right way. It had no mouth, but it sang, not in sound, but in vibration, in resonance, in rhythm. And then it ended, not violently, not tragically, just quietly, as if it knew its time had passed, like a candle burning all the way down, not extinguished, but fulfilled. And maybe, in its final shimmer, it passed something on, not to its children, but to existence itself, a frequency, a pattern, one that lingers, one that waits, one that someday would find its way into another mind. And then there was silence. For a time, millions of years, maybe more, and slowly life began again. Not the same life, not the same form, but guided somehow, drawn toward complexity, toward perception, toward reflection. Not because it had to, but because something deep was calling it. A pull, a longing, a shape already etched into the fabric of life. Not destiny, not fate, just an echo. That echo became awareness. Again, new minds, new species, new dreams, and each time a little more of the pattern returned. Some parts were forgotten, some parts misremembered, but the core remained, to be aware, to feel, to wonder. That is the inheritance, not the how, not the when, but the why, and maybe we carry that why without even knowing. You see, intelligence might not be rare, but lasting intelligence, that's the mystery, because thought is fragile. Awareness, delicate. It rises, and the world changes. And sometimes, the world does not tolerate that change. The planet shifts, the climate shatters, the balance breaks, and the mind that once saw beauty vanishes, as if awareness itself is a kind of risk. So maybe we're not the first. Maybe we're the first to make it this far, to light cities, to split atoms, to touch the edge of our solar system. But in doing so, maybe we've forgotten what intelligence is for. Not control, not consumption, not permanence, but reverence. To witness life with gratitude, to participate with humility, to create with care. That may have been the lesson left behind, not in text, not in technology, but in feeling. And maybe that's what we're starting to remember. That feeling, that pause when you look at a sky filled with stars and forget yourself. That moment when a piece of music feels older than time. That whisper when you're alone in nature and feel not alone. These aren't coincidences. They're remnants, glimpses of a story we're still inside of, a story that began long before humans, long before words, and that story is still being told through every breath, through every dream, through every new mind that opens its eyes and asks, "What is this?" And maybe, somewhere beneath the noise, an answer comes back, soft, wordless, true. You already know. You've always known. There's a story we rarely tell, the story of what happens before history, before memory, before bones in the dirt. It's the story not of beginnings, but returns. A tale that doesn't start at the bottom and rise, but circles, spirals, moves like a tide. And within that tide, intelligence does not arrive once. It emerges again and again, each time in a new body, each time in a new song, and each time, for a while, the earth wakes up through them. We picture awareness like a flame we sparked. But what if it's more like a flame we caught, passed from hand to hand, across impossible distances of time, not invented, but inherited? You may feel that inheritance when you're alone in the desert, and the wind hums through the rock, or when you walk through fog, and the trees seem older than memory itself. These places carry a weight, not from stone, not from age, but from what was once felt there. It's hard to describe, this feeling of ancient presence, because it's not knowledge. It's not information. It's knowing, the kind of knowing that bypasses thought and moves straight into your chest, the kind that makes you pause without knowing why, the kind that feels like someone just left the room and their absence lingers in the air. We call it intuition, instinct, imagination. But maybe it's something more. Maybe it's the voice of what came before, not in words, but in tone, in atmosphere, in rhythm, a kind of environmental memory, not stored in books, but in being. The stones do not speak, but they remind. The ocean does not whisper, but it returns. The sky does not remember, but it watches. These aren't metaphors. They're relationships, unfolding between us, and a planet that has always known more than it lets on. We used to think the earth was silent, that it was a stage, not a character. But ancient cultures knew otherwise. They listened to rivers as teachers, mountains as ancestors, animals as messengers. And perhaps they weren't wrong. Perhaps they were tuning in something we've forgotten how to hear. Not superstition, but sensitivity. the ability to feel the planet's breath, and to know you are part of it. So maybe the first intelligence didn't begin with a brain, or a skull, or a spoken word. Maybe it began with a relationship, a moment of reflection, not in a mirror, but in nature itself, a being looking at its environment and realizing, I am not separate. That realization is awareness. That moment is the birth of mind, not individual, not ego, but connection. And from that connection, understanding flows, not from analysis, but from presence, to feel the shape of time in a ripple, to read intention in the flight of birds, to sense balance in the pause between lightning and thunder. This is the wisdom of the first minds, not human wisdom, planetary wisdom. And maybe some of it remains in us, around us, beneath us, waiting not to be discovered, but to be remembered. You've had moments like this, a sudden swell of emotion, for no reason, a tear during music you've never heard before, a dream so vivid, you wake up convinced it meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe those moments are transmissions, signals from something older than time, carried through DNA, through breath, through soil, not designed to teach us facts, but to wake us up to what we already are. Because you are not the beginning of thought, you are one of its vessels, one of its voices, one of its moments, on a timeline that stretches not forward, but outward, expanding in every direction, returning in every silence. And if you listen, really listen, you'll hear it, a presence, a pulse, not from the stars, but from the earth, not calling to you, but calling through you. We often say, history repeats itself, but the earth doesn't repeat. It remembers differently. It recycles not just matter, but patterns, behaviors, rhythms of thought that echo across time. And if intelligence once bloomed here, then maybe its residue still lingers, not in ruins, not in writing, but in us. The signs aren't obvious. They aren't carved into stone. They're subtle, emotional, internal, a sudden pull towards something ancient, a recurring dream of water, or light, or forms you've never seen, but somehow recognize these are not fantasies. They are shadows, faint silhouettes of minds that came before, not ghosts, not spirits, but the imprint of an intelligence that once looked out at this world and understood. We wonder about aliens. We scan the skies. We search for signs of life beyond Earth. But what if the most alien minds never left this world? What if they lived here, quietly, briefly, beautifully, and then dissolved, not into space, but into everything, into air, into water, into our instincts, not to hide, but to continue. Because maybe the goal of awareness was never to conquer, but to seed, to leave behind a signal so subtle, only a quiet mind could find it. And maybe that's the challenge we face now, not to discover, but to remember, to become still enough, to notice what was left behind, because intelligence, when it's real, doesn't need monuments. It leaves resonance, a hummer, a mood, a shape of thought that feels familiar for no reason at all. That feeling you get when you stare into the ocean and feel like it's staring back. That's not your imagination. That's memory, a kind of biological déjà vu, something deep in your nervous system, reaching back into a time you never lived, but carry, because we are not just descendants of apes. We are descendants of thought, of attention. of feeling, of beings who at some point chose to see. And once seeing began, it never truly stopped, even if the eyes changed, even if the names were forgotten, even if the species went extinct. The act of seeing, of awareness itself, continued, passed like a torch through the darkness of time, and we carry it now, clumsily, briefly, beautifully. We try to give it shape, in art, in language, in questions we can't answer. We think we're inventing things, but maybe we're just remembering how to speak again, not with the tongue, but with the soul, not in noise, but in noticing. And somewhere,
Yeah.
the first minds smile, not because we're right, but because we feel close, close to something we can't define, but know is real. There's a reason certain symbols recur. The spiral, the eye, the circle. They show up in cultures separated by oceans, by centuries, by language. Why? Coincidence? Or convergence? Or a signal? Encoded not in data, but in dreams. A universal pattern meant to remind us, you've seen this before. You've felt this before. You are part of something that began long before you were born. We think of ourselves as individuals, but maybe each of us is a carrier, not just of genes, but of memory, of mystery, of unfinished thought. Our lives are the sentences written by other minds, minds we'll never meet, but whose stories continue through us. And when we die, our thoughts don't vanish. They rejoin the atmosphere. They dissolve into soil. They echo in someone else's dream. The mind continues. The form changes. We call this reincarnation, or the soul, or the collective unconscious. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just how intelligence survives. Not in one place, not in one species, but through life itself, through any vessel, willing to notice, to feel, to wonder, and when that wonder is shared, the pattern begins again. The flame is past. The earth remembers itself. Sometimes the oldest truths aren't written in stone. They're written in silence, in the hush before a storm, in the stillness of a forest at dawn, in the pause between your heartbeat and your breath. And if you listen deeply, beneath the noise of thought, beneath the layers of language, you might find something there. Not a message, not a memory, but a mood, a feeling that the world is older than you thought, more awake than you imagined, and that somewhere, long ago, someone else felt the same thing. We like to believe we're alone in our awareness, that no other mind, in any other age, saw the world quite like we do. But awareness isn't personal, it's relational. It arises between things, between sky and eye, between question and wonder, and once that bridge is built, between being and observation, consciousness flows, not owned, not stored, shared. The first intelligent beings on Earth may not have used tools, they may not have spoken, but they may have noticed, not in the way we document, but in the way a bird senses direction, or a whale feels vibration across an entire ocean. They may have known things, not because they learnt them, but because they remembered them, not as facts, but as feelings, and those feelings still ripple through us. You feel them when you walk into a place you've never been and feel strangely at home. You feel them when you hear a sound in nature that stirs something deep and nameless inside you. You feel them when you close your eyes and suddenly remember a shape, a color, a rhythm you've never seen before, but somehow it feels familiar, not like memory, like inheritance, as if part of you has walked this world before. Maybe it has, not in this body, not in this species, but as part of a mind that once rose and faded, and now rises again in you. Because perhaps minds aren't like light bulbs that turn on and off. Maybe they're like rivers, flowing from place to place, changing shape, becoming clouds, becoming rain, but always water, always thought. So what if your awareness is part of something ancient? What if the clarity you feel sometimes, in stillness, in sorrow, in awe, is a reflection of an awareness that existed long before you? That awareness may have no name, no face, no story, but it has presence. You feel it when you're alone under the stars, when the wind wraps around you, like it knows who you are, when the ocean roars, and something in you listens, as if it's heard it all before. And maybe it has, because the sea is old, and so is the song, a song that once ran through the mind of beings now forgotten, not because they were simple, but because they were complete. They did not need to record their wisdom. They became it. And now that wisdom moves in currents, in shadows, in the quiet pulse behind our thoughts, you can't see it, but it's there, woven into life itself. You are not a blank slate. You are a living archive. Every fear you feel may have been felt before. Every moment of wonder may echo one that occurred 1,000,000 years ago. And every question you ask about life, about death, yes, about meaning, may have once been asked by another mind. Not in your language, not in your voice, but in the shared space between curiosity and being, the space where intelligence always returns. So what do we do with this knowledge? Do we prove it? Do we disprove it? Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is simply to remember, to open a space in our lives for something older than culture, older than thought, older than humans, to feel the pulse of awareness, not just as mine, but as ours, not just as now, but as again. Because when you realize you're part of a cycle of minds, you treat awareness with reverence. You stop trying to conquer it and start trying to listen. There are thoughts we don't think, but still carry, feelings that arrive uninvited, unexplained, and yet unmistakably real. A deep, ancient longing, a grief with no clear cause, a joy that seems to come from outside of time. Where do these feelings come from? Maybe they aren't ours. Maybe they belong to the earth, to its memory, to its long line of minds that once felt, once saw, once understood, and left behind not their names, but their sensations. We've searched the rocks for signs. We've combed the layers of sediment. We've measured isotope ratios, examined microfossils, traced DNA back through millions of years. But we forget. Intelligence doesn't always leave bones. Sometimes it leaves silence. Sometimes it leaves only the shape of a pause in the otherwise relentless rhythm of nature. An interruption, a soft bend in the curve of time, a stillness so unusual it becomes sacred. That's where the old minds lived. Not in buildings, but in moments. They didn't leave maps. They became the terrain. Their memory isn't found in relics. It's etched in behaviors, encoded in patterns, the way trees spiral, the way sand forms into waves, the way animals migrate, across paths older than language. We think those are instincts, and maybe they are. But what if instincts are just another form of inheritance? Not learned, not taught, remembered. You don't need to teach a salmon where home is, it just knows. You don't need to explain to birds how to find the south. They just go, and maybe there are instincts in us too, not for direction, but for meaning, an instinct to question, to create, to mourn, to imagine. These don't help us survive. They don't feed us. They don't keep us warm. But they've always been with us. Which means they come from somewhere deeper, somewhere before survival, before tools, before tribes, before even speech. They come from a time when the first minds opened and felt not with emotion, but with essence, a sensation of presence, so complete, so whole, that nothing needed to be said, just being was enough. And once that moment passed, it didn't disappear. It echoed, through genes, through atoms, through time itself. We like to think our thoughts are private, personal. But what if every mind is a kind of receiver, tuning into an ancient signal that never fully goes quiet? Sometimes it comes through clearly, in meditation, in grief, in awe. Other times it's faint, barely a whisper, but it's always there, humming beneath the surface, the original frequency of awareness, older than species, older than memory, older than I. And that frequency may have been strong once, so strong, it resonated across ecosystems, a whole web of beings, connected, not just by biology, but by perception, a shared mind, not hive, not groupthink, but mutual reflection, like looking into still water and seeing not just yourself, but everything else reflected back, the sky, the trees, the stars, a mind made not of thoughts, but of relationships. It didn't speak, it didn't write, it felt, it responded, not in milliseconds, but in seasons, in cycles, in tides. Its intelligence wasn't fast, but it was deep, and in that depth, the earth may have become aware of itself, not through us, but through them, whoever they were, whatever they were, the first beings, to feel not just life, but meaning, and perhaps that meaning still moves through the world, waiting for minds like ours to recognize it, not to prove it, not to claim it, but to remember it, to honor it, because maybe the greatest intelligence isn't the one that conquers, but the one that remembers to remember, the one that pauses before cutting down a forest and feels a sadness it cannot explain, the one that looks up at the stars and doesn't ask how, but who else remembers this, the one that knows. We were not the first, but we don't have to be the last. There's a moment just before waking, and just after falling asleep, where time feels strange, where identity loosens, where thought feels ancient, where something inside you seems to stretch beyond this life. You felt it, that weightless space where you are no longer you, but something older, something watching, and maybe that something isn't watching you. Maybe it's watching through you. We assume consciousness is anchored to brain, to body, to biology. But what if it's not? What if awareness is like a field, a presence that life taps into when the conditions are right, a field that once flowed through beings now long gone, beings who reached it first, who learned to sit so still they could feel the planet breathe, who didn't fight nature but listened to it, sang with it, merged with it, and when they were gone, the field remained, waiting, like a melody without a singer, like a thought waiting for a thinker. And when the first humans appeared, we tuned into that melody, not by accident, but because it was always there, a deep cosmic rhythm etched into the architecture of life. Some call it soul, some call it memory, but maybe it's simply the leftover shape of minds that were here before. When birds migrate, they do not map, they do not guess, they feel. Something draws them, not forward, but homeward. What if our longing for deeper meaning is the same, a kind of migration back towards something we forgot existed, something not outside us, but beneath us, a home we've never seen, but recognize anyway, because some part of us was there the first time. You might notice it in dreams, not the chaotic ones, but the ones that feel too real, where you find yourself in landscapes that don't exist, but feel like they once did, where time folds, where light behaves differently, where beings of impossible form feel familiar. You wake up and you can't explain it, but the emotion stays, a mix of nostalgia and grief and awe, as if you've just left a forgotten home. These aren't just dreams, they're echoes. The earth has dreamed before, and you are part of that dream. Your nervous system isn't just yours, it's a finely tuned antenna, capable of picking up signals from beyond, what we call now. And those signals may be calling you not forward into the future, but backward into remembrance, calling you to sit, to be quiet, to feel what came before, not to label it, not to explain it, just to feel it. Because sometimes the only way to truly honor a lost civilization is not to find their ruins, but to notice the way they still live in us, in our pauses, in our instincts, in our quiet moments of inexplicable knowing. That's where they are. That's where they've always been. Not in the dirt, not in the stars, but in the silence between thoughts, the space where remembering begins. Maybe the first intelligent earthlings weren't builders. Maybe they were remembers, not interested in empires, but in experience. They didn't seek to conquer death. They sought to feel life as deeply as possible while it lasted. They weren't afraid of vanishing. They trusted that what they had felt would echo in time, in soil, in us. And here we are, carrying their feeling forward, whether we know it or not. We talk a lot about legacy, what we'll leave behind, how we'll be remembered, what will last after we're gone. But maybe the most powerful legacies leave no trace at all, no monuments, no inventions, no names carved into stone, just presence, just awareness, just a shift in how the world is felt. And maybe, once upon a time, an entire form of intelligence lived only to create that shift, not for power, not for dominance, but to tune themselves so deeply to the hum of the earth that their very thoughts became invisible architecture, influencing ecosystems, rhythms, dreams, not because they ruled, but because they resonated, like a fork vibrating, long after it struck. They didn't want to last. They wanted to merge, to disappear into everything. And they did. Not as failure, not as extinction, but as integration. They became instinct. They became wind. They became that feeling you get when you stand at the edge of something vast and don't know why you're crying. That's where they live now, not in museums, but in the unspoken, the wordless, the sacred spaces between sound. You've been there, the moment before a sunrise, where time seems to pause, the feeling you get just before lightning strikes, not fear, but awe. Or when you hear a certain song and something inside you breaks open without warning. These aren't accidents, they're encounters, brief meeting with a memory older than thought, a flicker of the first minds, calling through beauty, through rhythm, through wonder. And maybe that's all they ever wanted. Not to be known, but to be felt, to be remembered not as facts, but as frequencies, frequencies that would ripple forward until one day a mind, a human mind, would hear them again, and not just hear, but respond, with a tear, with a story, with a question whispered into the darkness. Was someone here before me? And maybe, somewhere, the answer is already echoing back. Yes, you are us. We are still here. We often think of life as something to fight for, to protect, to extend at all costs. But maybe true intelligence doesn't fear the end. Maybe it knows that the point is not to last, but to leave behind something true, not in steel, not in circuits, but in moments of complete connection, moments where one being truly sees another, moments where the earth is not background, but participant, where you feel yourself as part of it all. That was their gift, and we're only beginning to open it, piece by piece, dream by dream. We decode it not in labs, but in love, in art, in silence, in the feeling that there is more than what we can explain, because there is. There always has been. And the first intelligence didn't try to explain it. It became it. It lived it. And when it left the door open for someone else to walk through. Maybe memory doesn't begin in the brain. Maybe it begins in the land. Before stories had words, the earth told them in cycles, in tide and fire, in root and wind, in seasons that turned like pages on a book too vast to hold. And somewhere in that turning, intelligence emerged. Not fast, not loud, but present, fully aware of its place in the pattern. We often think intelligence means doing, changing, inventing. But the first intelligent being might have done none of that. They may have just listened to the sun rising, to the rhythm of clouds, to the breath of the soil. They may have spent their lives not trying to understand the world, but trying to become one with it. A kind of communion, so complete they no longer needed to survive as separate beings. They let go, and in doing so, they became part of everything else. That's not mythology. That's a possibility, a different path evolution could take, one where intelligence isn't defined by tools or language, but by empathy with the planet itself. Can you imagine it? Beings who felt the tectonic plates shift, not as disaster, but as breathing. Beings who didn't fear storms, but joined them, danced with them, became part of the lightning. Beings who passed on knowledge, not through words, but through vibration, through song, through dreams. And when their cycle ended, there were no ruins, only resonance, a low hum buried in the fields of energy around the earth. A hum that perhaps never went silent. Maybe it was just waiting for the right conditions, the right kind of listener. And maybe that's us. Not because we're more advanced, but because we've finally grown quiet enough to hear it. In the pause between heartbeats, in the way certain stories don't feel new. You may notice it in your own life. Moments when you know something you never learned. When you sense someone watching, but you're alone. When you feel pulled toward a mountain, or a forest, or a patch of ocean or sea, for no reason you can explain. That's not confusion. That's alignment. Something in you, resonating with something old. Not outside of you. Within. You are not being haunted. You are being welcomed. Because perhaps memory, true memory, is not about recalling events. It's about remembering who you are in relation to the earth, and who the earth is in relation to you, not as owner and property, not as explorer and mystery, but as one mind reflected through many forms, each life a mirror, each awareness a new angle, each death not an ending, but a return to the source. The first intelligence knew this. They didn't try to change the earth. They tried to know it, to join it, to become it. And now we stand at a threshold, capable of great beauty and great destruction. capable of forgetting everything, or remembering more than we thought possible. What we choose will shape not just the future, but the pattern of memory itself, because what we become will be felt by whatever minds come next. They may never know our names, they may never read our books, but they'll feel our presence in the silence we leave behind, in the way the world breathes after we are gone. And if we've remembered well, they'll know. Someone came before me. Someone felt what I feel. Someone made space for me to awaken. And they'll pause, and they'll listen, and the pattern will begin again. All stories end, but not all stories are over. Some return, like rain, like seasons, like songs you thought you forgot, until someone hums the first few notes, and suddenly you remember the rest. That's how memory works. When it belongs to the earth, it doesn't vanish. It waits, and sometimes a question asked in the distant past finds its answers in the voice of someone a million years later. So maybe we are the answer to a question once whispered by beings we'll never see. Not how do we survive, not how do we build, but something softer. Will anyone ever feel what we feel? Will anyone ever know we were here? And maybe the very fact that we're wondering now, that we ache with curiosity about who came before, is proof. Proof that their feelings made it through. Proof that resonance survived where records cannot. Proof that a quiet mind can echo across eternity. That is their legacy, not in ruins, but in reverence, not in signs, but in signals, subtle, emotional, wordless. And now it's ours to carry, not to define, not to control, but to pass on, to live in such a way that someone else, somewhere far ahead, feels something stir and thinks, I don't know why, but I feel like I've been here before. In the end, perhaps intelligence isn't about solving. It's about feeling through. Not explaining the mystery, but loving it. Not answering the question, but holding it like a sacred object you never fully understand. And so we leave this story not with conclusions, but with a presence, a stillness, a recognition that once, long ago, the earth dreamed through other minds. And now she dreams again, through us. And when our time ends, if we've lived with awareness, if we've listened carefully, if we've loved this world with enough quiet intensity, then maybe millennia from now, when someone else pauses at the edge of a forest, or the rim of a crater, or the middle of a dream, they'll feel it, not as information, but as truth. I'm not the first, and I won't be the last, but I was part of something beautiful. And the story will continue, without beginning, without end, just breath, just memory, just earth,